Hi soapsters, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm looking at making some tiny little mushrooms that wouldn't be out of place in a forest somewhere. They're really easy to make, and whilst I do finish them at the end with some airbrushing, you don't have to do that. So without further ado, let's take a look at today's video. What you can see we've got here is some red soap dough, and this is basically any recipe that you may have. You can use a soap dough. Just make sure you wrap it very, very tightly once it has saponified, and that will become your soap dough. And what I'm using here is I'm actually rolling it out between a piece of plastic. Now, this plastic I'm using is actually an old tablecloth cover, which I've repurposed. But you can use an old bag, you can use anything, even some greaseproof paper will work in order to roll this out. Although greaseproof paper, you may find you get a few wrinkles and stuff in it, but that's absolutely fine. So what we've got here is our red base, and I'm using some white soap dough, just rolling into little balls, flattening them, and then pressing it into the surface of the red soap dough. So this is going to create our spots. Now, because we're airbrushing it, these are really kind of markers as to where we want them, and it gives us that kind of feeling of the mushroom without going too far down the route of painting each individual mushroom with spots, but it gives us an overview when we just come to highlight those a little bit later on. I've sped this up as well just because it's a little bit boring watching somebody put lots of dots of white onto a red surface, but you can see here what we're kind of going for. And then what we'll do is we'll roll this out. Now, I've put a timer here so you can see exactly how long this is going to take, and you'll notice that basically we have quite a bit of rolling out, but we just want to get this relatively thin. And soap dough is not like pastry, it won't roll out very fast, so you have to use an even pressure going from the centre outwards and just spend a bit of time doing it. So you can see here this is going to take about 2 minutes to roll to the size and the thickness that I want. So once we've rolled that out, we are then going to bring in the moulds. Now these are just ice cube moulds. They're the circular or the spherical ice cube moulds. I've taken the top off and I'm just using the bottom section. So we peel our now flattened soap dough out, and I'm going to cut out 3 of these rounds. This is just a little ramekin I have handy, but you could use a cutter, anything round really that you've got of roughly the size that you need, but you'll see later on that I'm actually going to come back in with a rolling pin to roll these out further. So let's get our rounds cut out here, and I'm just using a scalpel, a craft knife here, just to cut the rounds out, and they don't have to be neat and tidy. We're just using this as very much a guide to get everything sorted. So let's get these cut out, and then we'll move on to lining our moulds, and I'll show you how that happens. So we're just going to speed through this. We've sped it up a little bit here just to kind of get through it. So we cut those 3 out, get rid of the excess that we don't need anymore, and it leaves us with our 3 little rounds here. And the really nice thing with soap dough is very much like sugar paste. You can use your fingers, use your finger and your thumb, and just kind of squeeze very gently on the edges, which will then kind of shape it into the shape that you want. Then just push it very delicately into our soap mold here. So you'll see that you're getting this really kind of nice concave shape, and you'll see that I've actually turned it over, so our white spots are now facing the mold, so we've got a plain red inside. And then I'm just thinning out the inside a little bit there. And then what I'll do is I'll just take my knife and I'll cut away any excess, being quite careful with the molds there. They can be quite expensive, so you don't want to cut through it. Just cut through the soap dough. And then we'll get all 3 of these molds done. Now this first one, I felt really that it was dropping too low below that kind of ridge, that top rim. And when I fill this up with some soap batter a little bit later on, I didn't think I was going to get quite enough in there. So on the next 2, I'm going to roll them out a little bit thinner, again using the plastic as a container, so I can roll them out a bit thinner. We're going to then line them so I can get the bottom of the mushroom very much in line with the top of the mould. So again, what I've done is just pop this into my plastic wrap again, and I'm rolling it out from the centre to the outside and just thinning it down a little bit, so I'm expanding that circle. We don't really worry about the white because they're just going to shape themselves into some really natural forms, and we'll just get these rolled out very nicely so that we can get this into our 2 other molds. So that's probably big enough as to what we need at the moment. And if we take our plastic wrap off, the great thing with this plastic is the more you use it, the more oils get imbibed into it, and the better it becomes for rolling things out. So this was a new piece I'm using here, which is why we're getting a little bit of stick, but be gentle with it. Just peel it off very, very gently, very, very tenderly, and you should be absolutely fine getting these off. So you can see here, I'm just getting an edge released and then rolling it back very, very carefully. So once we've got that released, we're going to pop it into our mold here, and we're just going to very, very gently kind of ease it in. So we're folding the edges up and just allowing it to kind of fall into the mold. And if you need to, you can use your thumbs and your fingers just to kind of create that shape and just very gently get that mold formed into that kind of half globe shape of this mold. And just be very, very careful with it, because we're now quite thin and we don't want to break through this. Otherwise, the soap that we're then going to pour inside this to kind of set everything together will just kind of pour through, and it'll make a mess of the outside. So once we've got that in there, you'll notice that there is quite a considerable amount left hanging over the top, but that's absolutely fine, because what I want to do with that is then just trim that off flush with the top of the mold, and that'll give us a nicer kind of domed shape to the mushroom. So again, I'm being very gentle with my thumb, just using it to push that into the mold. And you can see I've got a little gap there. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that gets filled in. And once we're touching the bottom, we should be fine. And we'll just get that really neatly filled in. We are going to go back over and airbrush these. So we'll move that. But if you're not going to airbrush them, just make sure you patch things up like I'm doing here with a little bit of additional soap on the inside. You won't see that on the outside, but it will just make sure you're not going to get that soap potentially seeping through and then creating a white mushroom rather than a red and white dotted one. So once we've got that there, we'll just bring in our, there's another little bit there. So I'm just patching up where I need to, because you can with this one. And I'm just going around and making sure that everything is pushed into the mold. So we're getting good shape. And then we'll just take our craft knife and just very carefully cut off the excess around the edge, so we get a really neat and tidy edge. And I preferred this method of doing it than cutting a circle out and pushing the circle in, because it gave me a full deep mold. So we'll move on next to our stems, and this is really simple. This is just a flesh coloured or a kind of light cream coloured dough, and I'm going to form these into little cones with a flat bottom and a flat top. So that's all I'm doing. I'm going to use the work area to make the flat bottom by standing it up. And I've got an actual piece of acrylic here that I'm going to use. And by turning the acrylic onto a slight angle and then rolling it, I can get a nice even roll. I can see through the acrylic to what I've got. I can see the thickness. And then all I need to do is just push down on the top and the bottom. Little wiggle there will make sure that it gives you a nice top and bottom. And we will then have a beautifully tailored mushroom stem. And I'm just going to make 3 of those in exactly the same fashion, one for each of the mushrooms. And that's going to basically sit in there once we fill this up with some additional soap batter. So let's speed through making the other 2 of these ones. I'll just get this done quite quickly, and you can see that it just doesn't take any time at all. Just making sure the top and the bottom are flat, and that they'll basically work for these mushrooms. So it's exactly the same process, just rolling them out with this little bit of acrylic. You can use a tile, you can use any flat surface really for making something to roll these out essentially. And then once we get through that, we'll actually then move on to making the gills for underneath of the mushroom itself. Now I've got a little tool for doing this, which you'll see in a second, and it's basically a veining tool for using on sugar flowers, but I'm using this for the gill of the mushroom. So what I'm going to do is pop it into there, roll it in so that I'm impressing those veining bits into the soap dough. I'm going to release it from the rolling area there, and then I'm just going to go around the edge. You can use a pair of scissors, or in this case I'm just using a craft knife to take off the excess soap dough, and then we'll pop a hole in the middle of that to sit the stem of the mushroom into. So you can see there I've just kind of taken that off, and I'm going to take that little tiny bit left there off, and then what I'm just going to do is make sure that all of those impressions are sat in there and release it from this little bit of kind of silicone very gently, and then these are going to sit on the underside with those veining marks looking outwards, just to simulate the veining and the ribbing, all of that gilling underneath the mushroom itself. So you can see it has stuck a little bit there. You could use a little bit of oil. You could use a little bit of cornstarch. I've chosen not to do that because I want it looking as realistic as possible, as rough and ready as possible. So let's just grab a piping tip here, just grabbing a little round piping tip, checking the size that I need, and I'm just going to use that to cut out the middle of these gills. And I'm going to make 3 of these ones again. So we've got 3 mushrooms, 3 of everything, and then as long as they all fit, just get a little squeeze so it fits inside these holes, and then it's just going to sit inside and fill that hole up at the bottom there. And let's just take that out. And once we're all done, we are going to move on to make up a little bit of batter to then fill these and start assembling this whole mushroom together. So here I've just got a very small amount of soap batter, and there's a little bit of fragrance in there, but it's my standard kind of soap recipe, just enough to kind of get into each of these molds. And what I am doing with it is I'm bringing it up to slightly past trace. So I've got kind of a medium to thick trace, so that it's going to kind of hold everything together. So I brought my little mushrooms in here, and we're just going to fill these up so that they're relatively full with this batter mix. And you can see how I've got a really decent trace on it, and you do need that in order to get everything to stick together. And this should just bring everything together, and I've had no problems with these sticking, so be absolutely fine with that. And then once you've got them to this stage, you can pop your gills onto them, and basically you want the gill side facing up, and we're pushing them down and into the mushroom. So they're just going to sit just underneath the outside section that we've made. So you're just going to cut a little bit off of here so it kind of sits into the mushroom itself, and we don't have that layer sticking out too far above the edge of the mushroom. And you're going to repeat that on all 3 of them here. And we'll speed this up a little bit now so you can just see how this is done in a little bit more of a speedy process. So we're just cutting around this one, and you could do this on the counter itself, and I probably will do that for the next couple. And now as you push this in, you can see in the middle there we've got a little bit of the soap poking through. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that out, pop the stem in, make sure that's up neat and tidy and kind of sticking up. Just make sure everything is pushed in, and I've got none of those little bits kind of sticking in there. Pushing it in, making sure it's all kind of settled in and sunk in. We've got all of that in there, and that's one done. So for the next couple, I thought it was going to be a lot easier to deal with it. So tapping it down just gets everything into the mold itself. We pop our gills down on the surface there, and now I know how much needs to really come off of that. I'm just going to kind of go around it on the table, so I'm taking off about that much. Now, the advantage of what I'm doing here is that the gills and the internal colour are relatively the same colour, and I know that I'm going to have to go back and use some airbrush on this, so I'm not particularly bothered if I'm going to leave a little bit of colour sticking out, because that will all work for me. So let's just get rid of a little bit of the overfill from this one, and you can see how well this is now set up. But you've got plenty of work time with this recipe, and it's still going to be perfectly usable. And you can see there how I've got the red of the cup sitting around the outside of the actual gills there. So when you put the stem in, everything will work quite nicely. So let's just get that all neat and tidy in there, and then we'll get our little stem, and we'll pop that into the top. Just push it in, and the overflow will hold on to that, and it'll stick into the fresh batter that's been poured into each of these mushrooms. So there we go. Let's get that all neat and tidy in there. We're just going to put a little bit of extra just in the hole here. I took too much out. So going a little bit back in just to make sure that this stem is going to be fully secured into there. And we can always clean up that excess with a little bit of spoon, wipe it off, and then just go around and tidy the bottom bit up. There we go. That's 2 down. And again, being perfectionist that I am, I'm just making sure that everything is neat and tidy. I haven't got too much batter kind of overflowing. Again, airbrush time, we'll get rid of most of that, but I do like to try and just make sure everything is neat and tidy as possible. And if we speed this last little one up here, just kind of really get through this one. Basically, once these are all done, you're going to leave them to saponify overnight, and then they will literally just pop out of the mold itself. Once it's all saponified, they'll just slide out very, very easily. So the unmolding of them was very uneventful, so we're not going to show that. But what I will do is I'll move on to now kind of getting the airbrush out and spraying these so that they look a little bit more realistic, and very much like the final versions you'll see very shortly. So what I'm using here are some water-based soap colours. I'm using some yellow here, which I'm just diluting down with a little bit of water. And then what we're going to do is, you can see I've already started on this one, but I'm just going to go around the base here and kind of yellow this up a little bit around the bottom. And then I'm going to go back in and then brown that down with some brown, but I didn't want it to be kind of an earthy brown. I wanted to have a little bit more kind of warmth to it. So by putting this yellow down first on all of them, you're going to get a far more warm brown colour rather than the kind of cold, barky brown, which I'm not really looking for. You'll see on the side of that one, it had a little bit of brown on it that I was testing, and I wanted to kind of go into the orange realm. So what I'm going to do here is just test that on a little bit of cloth, and then we're going back underneath, and you'll see now as I add this second colour, it will kind of dull down. It will come through eventually. It'll just dull that colour back a little bit, and I'm aiming this towards the edge of the bell, and just kind of keeping it towards the outside. So you're getting a bit more of a brown colour happening into there, and around the edge. So it's taking that orange colour and just kind of toning it down a wee bit. And again, if you're adding water into these, you have to realise it's going to stick to the soap, and it is going to kind of melt into the soap a little bit, and then it's going to evaporate off. So you're just going to be left with the colour. So once you've got that kind of underneath done, we're going to go into the top here with some red. Now this is quite a bright red that I'm going in with first of all, and I'm going over the whole thing. I'm not worrying about these spots because I'm going to go back into those and just paint them in with some white sparkle mica. They needed to be a little bit magical. They are, after all, kind of like the mushrooms or the toadstools you'll get in family films. So I wanted a little bit of sparkle in them. So what I'm doing here is I'm just putting that red colour all the way across it. I'm going to go in with a darker red to really kind of boost that, let them dry, and then go back in with the white. So we're just adding our next little bit of colour here. And I'm using very, very small amounts of colour here, just enough to kind of get some nice red into the top of these ones. And you do get a nice shine off of this as well. So if you want a nice shiny soap, that works quite nicely. And you can see where I've got kind of like the wrinkles on the top surface there as well. So this is a slightly darker colour going in. Again, we're really enriching this red colour and making sure that we really make that red pop. And you can still see where the white outlines are. So we're still kind of know where they're going to be, but we're just going to go over them with a white. And again, let's just bolster the red on this one. And I'm using a very, very small amount of colour here. And it is a soap colour. It's a liquid soap colour that I'm just using to spray all over these. So now that we've got that, we come in with our white powder and we're just dabbing it in. This is a little filbert brush I've got, and some white mica powder. And just rather than rubbing it, we're kind of dabbing it onto the surface. And then we'll just get rid of the excess by blowing that off. And you can see how those kind of little spots just go in like that. I'm just following really where those outlines were. So they're quite helpful to have those, and just make sure that we're kind of getting them in there. So I'll pop a little bit of music on and you can see this in double time and how I put all the little spots on.
And here we have the final soap, and you can see they look kind of realistic mushrooms. They've got a little bit of dirt on them. The dirt is actually just some coffee grinds that I've actually dried out using the microwave. And I've just styled them with a little bit of grass in there. So those are the final mushrooms.
So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the bell icon if you'd like to get notified when a new video is uploaded. And thanks a lot, Soapsters. I'll see you again next time.